TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. We got a packed show right now. 4 awesome people, 2 good, 2 evil, and we're going to be talking about the debate. What's wrong with you? Why are you laughing at that? You should be enraged. And we're going to be talking about the debate we watched earlier between Mike Licona and Bart Ehrman on the resurrection. If you didn't catch it, then no problem. We'll definitely recap their main positions, and then we're going to have a discussion between Christians and Muslims. I'm assuming almost everyone who's watching right now knows who I am if you're on my channel, but they did announce that we'd be doing this at the end of the debate, so it's possible that there are some new people here. So I'm David Wood. I'm a Christian, grew up as an atheist, became a Christian in prison, actually, so I'm one of the famous jailhouse converts we all hear so much about. I got on YouTube back before it was super cool and when you were kind of a loser if you got on YouTube. But anyway, I've stuck with it all these years, and this is my channel. And so I guess we'll go around counterclockwise from what I'm seeing. AP, pretty much everyone knows who you are as well because you have a big channel and have been on with me a ton of times. So why don't you give yourself a quick intro, AP?
Yeah, so since you said Christians and Muslims instead of Christians and atheists, I would like to say...
Wait, what did I say? Did I say that?
Yes.
Really? That's... Look, I've gone so long without talking about atheism that... also, roughly 20 to 30 minutes ago, I was recording a video response to Zakir Naik, which will be up tomorrow, everyone. So anyway,
again.
In fact, right when Inspiring Philosophy, he got on right before you guys, and I started saying the debate with Zakir Naik. Watching the debate with Zakir Naik because
it's from that 7-hour debate today. Your brain is hurt just like mine.
Oh yeah. Plus, it's actually worse because I was up all night with my kids and then had to stay up all day to watch the debate. So anyway, but yeah, it's fine. All right, AP.
So me, I am. My name is Apostate Prophet. I am a Muslim prophet, and everybody pretty much knows me because I'm very famous. I am an ex-Muslim and an atheist. I represent the atheist masterminds here, who will, of course, be superior. Since I am very much familiar with the Muslim apologists and the Muslim atheist and Muslim Christian debates and their lingo, for me, the only thing that matters today is who destroyed whom, who humiliated whom. So that's what I want to talk about today.
Hey, could you even imagine, by the way, I mean, Bart Ehrman and Mike Licona, like, I'm your teacher, boy. I'm your teacher. You got owned. Where are my grapes? Could you imagine, like Mike Licona while Bart Ehrman is talking, like eating grapes and stuff? Anyway,
referencing the great Ali Adawa and Apostate Prophet debate there.
All right, so we have Mike Jones.
Yeah, I'm Mike Jones. I run Inspiring Philosophy. I've been on YouTube since about 2011, 2012. So back again when it was not cool yet. Couple of years after David Wood got on. I'm a Christian apologist on here, currently getting my master's in philosophy.
And you had for years, no one saw your face.
No
one saw your face because, but you have this, no offense, but you have you kind of have a voice of like a teenager whose voice is starting to crack. And so
it sure do.
For years, I was like, man, this 14-year-old is freaking smart, man. This kid's going to kill it when he grows up.
Yeah. And I'm like 36 now. But yeah, it was, I still wouldn't show my face if I didn't have to, but I felt like it was necessary. So yeah, for first 5 years, no one knew who I was. And then finally, the cat got out of the bag, and I'm like, all right, I'll just go public.
All right, and finally, we also have Derek from Myth Vision. And I remember it seemed like not very long ago, I clicked on your channel, and you had like 10,000 subscribers. And then I just clicked on it to get the link to put in the description box here. And it seemed like you're growing really fast.
Yeah,
Uh,
he is.
Depends, man. I'm watching the analytics, and you know how some months are. It's hit or miss.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a fundamentalist Christian, went through various denominations, of course, and eventually came out on the other side as someone who no longer believes. You could label me, pigeonhole me, if you will, an atheist. Um, but yeah, my goal is to educate people and to think about the Bible in ways that you won't hear at church. You're not going to hear it typically, when you go to your local church or anything. And a lot of the academics I have on come from various backgrounds. So it's not just atheist, in case you're wondering. I've just recently had Del Allison Jr., Del C. Allison on the show, and I can learn from anyone and everyone. I do avoid apologetics. I was in the vein of that under Norman Geisler, so I am familiar with apologetics quite well. I look at more critical thinking. Go check it out if you're interested and you're curious to hear an alternative message and you want to get your shield and your sword ready for battle and you want to know how to defend your faith. Well, these are the heaviest hitter academics in the world that I have on my channel. So
Hey,
Getting very passionate here. Yeah.
little side note, Derek. I'm sitting here looking at all four of us right in front of me, and well, you are clearly the most pleasing to the eyes. Let's say, right?
Also
And-
go ahead then.
No, so I just so everyone knows, I am an unstoppable fire hose of awesome ideas, and what just popped into my head is that you should one day get Colin from Islam Critiqued on your channel to discuss Islam, because I guarantee you guys together would get like 200 million Muslim women watching your channel going, "Ooh, these kuffar are so dreamy. I'll listen to anything they say." And
my gosh.
anyway, guaranteed ton of new viewers. Look, AP, look, he knows I'm not lying.
Yeah. That's actually something good
yeah.
to point out. Derek is one of the few. Derek is one of the very few people online who runs such a channel that mostly focuses on criticism, critically analyzing religious and myths and things like that. And he is one of the very few people who actually dares to focus on Islam as well, and who invites people who are critical of Islam, who invites scholars who study Islam and the Quran, and he sits down with them and digs very deeply into all the things that need to be pointed out about Islam. So he does some really good job, and I really appreciate that. So,
All
go
right,
subscribe.
and anyone who wants any links to our channels, obviously you're on my channel right now, but the links to Myth Vision Podcast and AP's channel and Inspiring Philosophy are all in the description box if you want to check out their channels. All right, well, we had a debate, and I really didn't think I was going to make it, given that I was on almost no sleep in 2 days, but especially when it's a 2-hour debate. But it actually, because they're switching back and forth between taking questions and them responding to each other, and had breaks in there and so on, it actually moved along at a really good pace. So let's go ahead and go around, whoever wants to start, and just give some overall thoughts on the debates or anything you wanted to talk about, and then we'll get into a little more specifics afterwards. So who wants to jump in first? You want me to pick
Why
one?
don't we let one of the atheists go first?
Yeah.
since
The first
they're
shall be
guest
last. Okay, the first shall be last. So
Derek, what do you thought? And you were actually they said you were moderating the questions, right?
yes, Q&A. I was controlling the Q&A. They wanted me to pick coherent questions. If you didn't write one, don't murder the messenger, okay? There were definite differences in some of these questions. Anyway, it required my attention. I think there was a part towards the end where I kind of blanked out for a while because I'd already caught up on questions, and it was kind of repetitive in certain points. But overall, I thought it was a very interesting debate. I don't think there was much. The only thing I learned was exactly where they stood on the literature. I would say what really got me is how Mike is viewing the gospel literature, and what there's way more, I think, reliance upon what's being said in the text versus what Bart Ehrman is doing is he's approaching it like he wouldn't have as much, how do I put this? If I'm speaking about your parent or there's someone of your loved one, you're going to be more defensive, more protective. You're going to have a lot more reliance and dependence on it. And Bart seems like he's approaching it like he would approach any other religion, and not have that kind of reluctance to defend it or protect it. He's just bringing the scalpel. And Mike is saying, no, 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 this is true. This is true. And I think that was where ultimately that kept coming back to this idea that Mike believes this is true. Bart doesn't see any reason to believe the ontological conclusions and would want anyone to doubt it, even though he said, I don't try to pressure anybody to not believe. You kind of sense that he wants you to at least think like he's thinking in some sense. I don't know. That's how I felt overall that the debate went. A lot of people were talking before this debate that they didn't think anything new would be said. I've been hearing these things for a long time. Did you guys hear anything new?
So I would think some of the stuff Mike mentioned in some of his rebuttals, like with the scholars on identifying some of the gospel authors, like say that maybe 50. He at one point said like 51% of scholars. This one survey he cited said 51% of these scholars would say Mark is actually the author of Mark. So I thought he brought some new information in that area. Terms of comparisons with like Plutarch, he brought some interesting new information there. But for the most part, it was a lot of repeating from a lot of stuff we heard from like past debates for sure. My overall take on this was I thought Ehrman did better in cross-examination stuff. He is very good at when he's in a direct conversation with someone. He's very confident. He projects that. He's very good at getting that across. When he does his rebuttals, sometimes he's a little scatterbrained. Like it was like he repeats himself too much. He says the same stuff. He just sort of harps on the same stuff. And Licona did a pretty good job of going through in his rebuttals from point to point to point to point. So I think Ehrman did a lot better in like the firing back when they're talking directly to each other. And Licona did, in my view, did better in the rebuttal part, getting his rebuttals across in that sense. So I would say what I would say is that one thing I would criticize Mike on is that he needs to project more confidence in these debates. He needs to just say things like yes and no, not, well, I think, this is good. No, he needs to be like, yes, no, and here's why. Like, just be forward, and because Ehrman is very good at showing that confidence, and it can be intimidating, for sure. That's
Even
definitely
if you
how I
don't draw
felt.
his conclusions, right? Like, so I wouldn't agree with him on probably plenty of points if we actually narrow it down, but he comes across like, I got it, and you need to see it like my way, and it makes you intimidated a bit. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. And then
by the way, that's just kind of because I've known Mike Licona since 2001, and it's just kind of his personality. He's very critical of his positions, and lots of people are trained, and it doesn't matter. You gotta come hitting it hard. Whereas he's just sort of being honest about his his how he feels about the points and so on.
He needs to watch Dawa. He needs to watch Muslim apologists and learn a little bit from them and how to stand his position and his ground.
I think he is stronger when he's doing his rebuttals because he's not like eye to eye with someone. He's just like, let me just list my stuff here and go. And then my only critique of Ehrman in that was like he needs to be more bam, 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 bam. Here's my point on this. Here's my point on this. And he just seems like he's a little bit all over the place. But that would be my overall take on it.
I will say, if we're going to compliment how they were, Mike is an extreme gentleman. I mean, I've interviewed him myself, and I don't think he's one of my favorite to talk with. He's just one of the guys invites me to go shooting with him one day. And he's just such a nice guy. We're sitting here talking. You guys take that. We live in the South. Okay. So you got to bear with us. All right, y'all.
Yeah. So the thing is, I wasn't there from the very beginning. I had kind of a busy day taking care of my kids. So I was kind of in and out. I missed the beginnings. I jumped in at some point in the morning. And as soon as I jumped in, what I noticed was that Bart Ehrman was going very hard. Like he was very aggressively, questioning and examining Mike Licona's positions. And Mike Licona was just being very calm, as you guys just described. I heard things that I have heard in these debates for a long time. I joined toward the second part of the debate and then very much listened through it until the end. I think to many people, one of the most memorable things will be Bart Ehrman's closing statements, his final speech. He was trying to be trying to really clarify certain things and explain where he stands on what you believe and how it impacts people and what he really cares about. Like, believe what you want, just don't harm, and so on. And he was also going into how people are biased in believing in certain things. I think one thing that is very different about Bart Ehrman is he's quite different from the regular atheist or anti-theist debater, in that those people usually don't give scripture very much credit. They are just being very critical of what theistic people believe in, and they just want to attack the whole idea of believing in something. Bart Ehrman puts much more trust in the actual text of the New Testament, and gives some credit to how much it actually accurately represents Jesus as a historical figure and the things that he may have said and not have said. His criticism is that much of what you find in the Gospels might be certain legends that do not necessarily represent the true Jesus and the things that he really said, but that people, because of their beliefs, added these things later on to the text in order to shape the certain religious figure of Jesus whom they wanted to follow. And that is also a field that I find personally very interesting. Dr. Michael Kona makes a lot of appeals to certain prophecies that you find in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, and how they correspond with things that Jesus did in his life or said in his life. But then can you really trust that Jesus actually did and said those things? And why were they actually included in the New Testament scripture? Were they included because people just wanted him to fit into that specific narrative, and so on?
That fits the Q&A session I had. So there was an interesting question. Everyone knows Mike Licona got in big trouble for talking about what skeptics like to call the zombie apocalypse in Matthew. But Christians will probably call just the saints resurrected in this motif in Matthew 28. And he got fired from a job because he took a stance that this was not literally historical, that it had some other usage. He doesn't like the term legend. Legend carries this package I don't think he's interested in using. I know Del Allison's okay with it, but at the end of the day, there was a question that I saw, it was interesting, about is that passage trying to fulfill scripture? Because Matthew's all about, and this fulfilled scripture, and this fulfilled scripture. So is Matthew's driving interest is to fulfill scripture rather than necessarily write history? And this is something interesting why I said that when they approach the literary text, they have a different approach. And one is looking at it I feel like one is looking at it not having to protect a creed in some sense. Like if we get to the virgin births, that was one of the highlights in the debate where Mike and him were arguing, and Bart was saying, look, how many virgin births are in antiquity? And he says, a lot. And he goes, yeah, and these are in the Greco-Roman world. And you see this in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, and he's trying to lift it and bring it over. And I could see this was not a very comfortable place because of his faith. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm not a mind reader, but it appeared that way. So I'll shut up after that. But
yeah. If anyone doesn't know in case people didn't watch or you don't know Mike's background, he believes that. Well, I mean, he's correct that in the ancient world, writers would use literary devices that are not common to us anymore, and so they seem really weird to us, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sympathetic to the idea of literary devices that we no longer use anymore, and that might be confusing to someone, from a different place at a different period in time. So just imagine you're watching your football team or something like that, and you walk out and you say, oh man, they slaughtered those guys. Well, saying slaughtered there is a literary device, right? Yeah. No one actually got slaughtered. But you can imagine coming, 2,000 years from now to where they don't use any terms like that in that way. And they go, oh, those poor people got slaughtered over a game. And then, what you hope would happen would be then when they see that the team was around later, a week after, oh, maybe they're speaking differently than what we are. So there's no
Wait
question.
a minute, I thought those people were slaughtered.
Yeah. So there's no question that people in the ancient world used different literary devices. It's just to what extent. And so Mike looks at certain things in the Gospels, and especially when he can find parallels in other sources of similar time, and say, oh, that person is clearly using a literary device over here, and they're doing something similar in the New Testament. So maybe they're using a literary device over here. But yes, that can get him into trouble. And it's funny because I notice Bart Ehrman likes to bring up the things that he knows will get Mike into trouble.
Yeah, that's
kind of funny. Okay, so anyway, my thoughts. I really liked this debate as far as two sides getting down to kind of what the core issues are, so people can see sort of which side of the line they're on. Because Mike is arguing here are historical facts, and Bart and I agree on what these facts are, and so we're looking for the best way to explain these facts. And I'm using these principles of historical investigation, and I'm concluding that the best explanation for these facts is that Jesus rose from the dead. And then you have Bart Ehrman saying this is not the same sort of conclusion as other conclusions about history, so this is actually in a different category, and you can't apply those things in the same way. But I think as far as them, Mike actually giving the and keep in mind, everyone, this is not just what does the Bible say or this or that. It's a specific question. They're using historical methods to determine whether a historian can conclude using the historical method that Jesus' resurrection actually happened, right? So Bart would agree. Hey, if you just believe it for religious reasons or something like that's up to you. So they're disagreeing about whether a historian using the historian's craft can conclude that Jesus rose from the dead. And so I thought they did a great job of getting down to a lot of what, at the end of the day, seems like it's going to be philosophical disagreements about what you can conclude given evidence, especially when someone is concluding that a miracle is the best explanation here. Anyway,
David,
go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Bart, historically, draws the conclusion that a historian can say that for sure they believed that Jesus rose from the dead. That can be historically, methodologically shown that they believed he rose from the dead. He draws the line from they believed that something happened and that they thought they saw Jesus. He agrees with Habermas, everybody else on that idea. It's when you go beyond that is faith. What did they see? What did they experience? Historically, we can't prove is what his point was. We can't say what that actually was. And then we can get into other religious, different religions that have claims, whether it be Muhammad splitting the moon or whatever it might be. They believe this happened. You can't prove that these particular things. If anything, you probably show the opposite in some of those claims. But anyway.
Yeah, and actually, this would be a good time. Why don't we, especially for people who didn't get to see it, why don't Mike Jones here and I sort of lay out, not going into a ton of detail, just the main argument, and then you guys can summarize Bart's main argument, and that way people will start to see where the dispute was, that I think was anyway, especially for people who haven't been following a ton of debates or don't know what the discussion at that level is. If you've been following Mike Licona and Bart Ehrman for a while, you know their positions and so on. So there wasn't a ton of new stuff there. But as far as anyone who wants to know what the issues are, they did a good job getting to the core of the issue. So Mike, you wanna break down Mike Licona's main position, and I'll share anything I want, and then
So general position that Licona was laying out is that we have these facts that are agreed upon by the majority of scholars from the New Testament. We don't have to assume everything in the Gospels is reliable. We don't have to assume everything we're getting from the Bible is reliable. Just there are these certain facts that sort of come out of the sources that have been handed down to us. And so from these facts, like the idea that Jesus that appeared to Paul. There were skeptics that converted. Appeared had a group had appeared as some groups as well. That I don't think he really brought up the empty tomb, but that could be another issue as well. But this idea that there were these skeptics converted, there were these appearances that happened.
One second. I actually took a screenshot of his fact slide, so I'll just run through those real quick. The facts he used for this debate: Jesus' death, his appearances to individuals, his appearances to groups, his appearance to Paul, that they concluded that he had physically risen from the dead, and that they regarded it as a historical event. And the only one I think Ehrman disagreed with was the group appearances. But those are the facts he used. But yeah, go ahead.
Right. In supporting that, he also mentioned that there is evidence that at least some of the apostles did suffer persecution. I know he mentioned that as well. He also mentioned the possibility of James, who was a skeptic, converting as well, which I don't even think Ehrman disputes that from what I remember him in interviews saying. But so Licona laid out these facts. Then he basically said, okay, let's see what the best explanation for these facts is. Can they be explained by the idea that the disciples lied, or that they had all these hallucinations? And his point was that regardless of philosophical beliefs background, philosophical presuppositions, naturalism, or theism, the simplest explanation, the explanation that's going to make the least amount of ad hoc assumptions, that's going to have explanatory scope, it's going to have explanatory power, that's going to be plausible, regardless of metaphysical presuppositions, metaphysical prejudice, the simplest and most parsimonious explanation would be that a resurrection happened. So that was Licona's general position that he was laying out. And so his reply, and he goes into this in a lot more detail in his book, is that when you try to offer an alternative explanation to the resurrection hypothesis, like a naturalistic explanation, he mentioned one specific guy in the debate, and he went into challenging those natural explanations this guy offered. You get an ad hoc explanation. You multiply entities beyond necessity. It's not plausible. And so when you compare the resurrection hypothesis to naturalistic hypotheses, they become more ad hoc, and the resurrection is the simplest explanation. So that's generally what he was laying on. Now, D. Wood can add some more to that, clarify some things. Yeah, and then we'll jump over to the other two here.
Yeah. So the reason I find this Mike's overall approach interesting is it's very similar to why I concluded that Jesus rose from the dead back in the 1990s. I had less information. I had less information than I have now. And the difference is I didn't know about the 1 Corinthians creed, that we have an actual early creed that mentions Jesus' death and burial and appearances. So I didn't know about that. I would have thought that was very important. I forget where this was. I think it was maybe Fox's Book of Martyrs or something like that. But I believed back then that all of the apostles except John had been killed for their faith in Christ. When, for everyone who's heard that, we have good reasons to think that a few specific people were killed for their belief in Christ, but a lot of the other ones are from late sources. You have sources on them, but they're late, and so it's going to depend on how much confidence you put in those sources. And so, but apart from that, the reasoning is the same. It's here's what we know, and so these guys back then reached very quickly a conclusion that Jesus had risen from the dead, and what explains that? What accounts for their belief? And so back then, I'm just thinking, okay, someone hallucinates, but I could hallucinate right now. I'm not going to conclude that someone rose from the dead, or someone dreamed about him. Well, I could dream about someone, grandma dying and then appearing to me. I'm not going to conclude that grandma rose from the dead and appeared to me, let alone to multiple people. And so, and I have to point out, because this is actually important given the discussion right now, this happened around the same time that I was simultaneously thinking about the design argument and the moral argument. And so I was already doubting my atheism, when I wonder if I were still a confident atheist, then I might have ruled out any sort of miraculous explanation. But it was just at a time when I was looking at it, I was thinking, okay, what actually accounts for this? What actually accounts for these people becoming convinced that a man rose from the dead and appeared to them? I couldn't think of anything that actually fit well, apart from Jesus actually rising and appearing to them. But, and this will lead into Bart's position here, you could argue that because it involves a miracle, that's automatically going to be the least probable explanation. So why don't you guys go ahead and give a discussion summary of Bart's position?
AP, you want to start her?
I think Derek would make a better start in the rundown of all that. Yeah.
I think that, just to put it in a nutshell, how often do people rise from the dead? How often do people walk on water? To use this idea, right? How often do these, what we, like, if you and I actually witness these things ourselves, we've never seen that happen in our life, right? He's trying to make an analogy, but also show how common is this? It's like one of the least probable things that happen in history. So a miracle would be one of those uncommon things. So he's starting with that, and then he's saying what typically happens, you know, and then he wants to use entropy. He wants to point out, I think, second law of thermodynamics. He wants to kind of throw out a few things to point out, you know, bodies decay. They don't come back. When they die, they don't come back. That's the typical thing we all experience. So what are the odds that this one actually happened? I think a lot of it, just my personal opinion in the debate, he got so lost in that. And for me, I would have gone into the Greco-Roman world. I would have pointed out analogies to other examples of characters, even though they're not Xerox copies like Zeitgeist would like to make you think. There is definitely in the air the idea. And not only that, with resurrection. I mean, the Qumran sect believed the teacher of righteousness would come back after 40 years. There would be a resurrection. So this is what I wish he did. I'm thinking to myself, like what builds up to the anticipation for someone expecting or hoping to see something? If you build that up enough, they might actually see what they want to see through the traumatic experience they went through. This is me getting into the whole other alternative explanations that you might think are ad hoc. But I think that was his approach, was to show how uncommon are miraculous things to happen, and why should we make that be this one thing? And of course, Mike's saying, if God exists, so he wants to take it before Jesus, he wants you to believe that if God exists, he would have raised Jesus from the dead. Of course, Bart doesn't believe God exists. So how do we go from there? I mean, it's like you're going to hit a wall no matter what. No matter who you are, you're going to hit a wall. And of course, I have my own conclusions about the God of the Hebrew Bible. And I think Bart might agree with most of that after listening to his Genesis lectures. I don't know. AP, what am I missing that Bart says? Because I want to critique some of the things he should have said, in my opinion. But anyway.
I think you very much covered it. He went for the whole idea of that he thinks much of it is accurate. People did see something happen on that day. They did see something happen, but he refuses to believe that people actually saw somebody, resurrected and rising and all that. He has different explanations for that. He said that historians don't concern themselves with the supernatural and can't verify that these things are historically unverifiable. He said he brought up the whole idea that a resurrection altogether is something that is incomparable to real examples in the real world, and that they are contrary to the laws of physics, the laws of entropy. He pointed out that Jesus' story is not unique in terms of certain features like virgin birth and others. He also mentioned that in a conversation with me before, because I specifically asked him about the virgin birth and the origins of it and why Muslims would adopt that story. And he had a whole thing about how Christians are believers, people who believe in certain things, and how the earliest Christians also added certain things to the story of Jesus through which the current scripture that we have and that we hold in our hands came into existence, and that you cannot fully trust. You cannot fully trust
Yeah.
without a bias that everything it says is certainly an accurate description of everything that happened and that took place. And I think one of the things that I personally find very interesting, because this is one of the reasons why I have always been skeptical about religious ideas, is when he pushed Mike Licona a little bit on the whole idea of you doubted and you came back to Christianity not because it makes so much sense, but rather because Christianity is what you happen to be around and be in. So you were a Christian and you doubted it and you came back to it. It's not like you were a Hindu or a Muslim or something else, and then you questioned and you thought, oh yeah, okay, I think Jesus makes sense. The resurrection makes sense. Of course, Dr. Mark Licona offered the response to that it wasn't that. It wasn't because I was born into Christianity. Of course, that's a factor, but it was because it makes sense. But again, that is a discussion that you can argue back and forth forever. Nobody will admit that that there is something with their own side of the argument.
I got an idea. Why don't before we get into some criticisms, how about Mike? How about we give a couple of anything we liked or thought was Bart Ehrman's best points, and then AP and Derek can give what they thought Mike's best points were. Does that work?
Yeah.
Bart's
I think Ehrman's best points was to focus in on Mike's evidence. I don't think it was. I'll just briefly say I don't think his best point was focusing on violation of natural law because of.
I had a problem with that one too, but.
Yeah, but I think his best points is when he started hitting Mike in on, okay, well, you're getting a lot of this from Paul. You're getting a lot of this from Paul. Remember, this is coming from Paul. Can we really trust him here, 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 and here? And I think that when he was doing that in kind of like the cross-examination area, that's when he looked his best. I thought that was by far when Ehrman looked the best in the debate.
Yeah, and I'm along the same lines there as far as I think his best stuff. As far as, I mean, some of the way he was arguing what is known as a kind of Humean approach, where a natural explanation is always going to be more probable than a supernatural explanation.
Which is kind of ironic, actually, because when he was talking about natural law, he's not even taking Hume's view of what natural laws are. He doesn't directly state it, but that was implied in there. So there's this weird pushback in Hume's writings, but that's another story.
Yeah, it's basically when he was going into philosophy, he's got some problems, and we can expand upon that here in a few minutes. But yeah, I thought he was kind of strongest when it was sort of, hey, you're basing a lot of things on Paul, and if it was someone else in the world at some other point in history saying this, it doesn't seem like you'd have as much confidence in this one guy, even if that one guy were willing to die and knew other people and so on. Doesn't seem like you'd put that same level of confidence in that. And then also, going into appearances of Mary and stuff, and my goodness, you should be all over these if you believe in eyewitnesses seeing these things. So I think that was kind of I think that was his best stuff. But guys, did you think? Oh, go ahead.
One quick thing, one quick side quest. I think we all agree on this. I thought it was great how they both kept saying, "Yeah, of course Jesus died by crucifixion, guys." Like, who would reject that? And I just kept thinking of AP and D Wood here, and I'm like, oh, they're loving this part.
1.6 billion people. That's who. All right, guys. So what did you guys think was Mike's strongest points, and then we'll get into points where we really disagreed.
Okay, fine. You want me to say it? I'll say it. I really enjoyed how Mike stuck to the creed in 1 Corinthians 15, and wanted to point out, like, he did a really good debate tactic, in my opinion, and I think he's very honest in the way he presents this. But he's like, Dr. Ehrman, you agree with me. Like, we agree. You believe what Paul's saying here is accurately presenting. I'm more cautious, personally, on 1 Corinthians 15. I have my reasons, and Bart brought one of those up. There's 500. witnesses. And I kind of wonder if this is a jab at Pentecost. Is this, there's different ideas on how to explain this, but why the Gospels never mention 500 is beyond my understanding. Also, women aren't mentioned. Why aren't they mentioned? Dale Allison talks about this in his resurrection book. Anyway, I thought he did a great job on that 1 Corinthians 15 and saying, by the way, you know what else Paul talks about? Group appearances. And he wanted to drive that, I think, and to point out, well, you can't have group hallucinations. Now, I know people want to bring up Fatima and whatever, like to kind of point out people see things in a group setting and maybe they are interpreting it with that cultural, whatever they already are hoping for or whatever might be what they're visioning. Like Mary has appeared to many people in groups. I don't know. I'm throwing the criticism back, but the point was he actually drove that home. And I think Bart avoided dealing with the group concepts. He kind of just kept dodging that group thing, and he could have actually dealt with it head on if he had I don't know. I've never heard him actually deal with the group thing specifically. That's my critique of Bart, but also my thumbs up to Mike Lacone on that.
What do you think, AP?
Yeah, I think the good thing, as far as I heard and listened to it, the best thing, I agree with Derek very much here, from Mike was his whole idea that if you agree that that these reports are very much authentic and that people did see something on that day, then how could you possibly explain it with anything but that they actually saw Jesus rise and all that, because you cannot have a group hallucination like that. There is simply no other proper explanation to this. And I agree with him, actually, quite a bit on that. I think the more Bart Ehrman, explicitly and insistingly agrees that accounts of that day are authentic, the more he causes a problem for his own position, because he has to explain what actually happened instead of an actual resurrection. And I think Mike insisting that the resurrection is the best explanation because nothing else makes sense is, I think, a good point. He makes good use of Bart Ehrman's, I would say, a little bit weak position there. The bad thing would be, I said, I just caught one thing that he said which I thought, okay, that's a bad position to have, which is him saying that people would not create a fictional narrative, of Jesus and of certain life events because if that was the case, they would have made something much better out of it. And he brought in the whole factor of embarrassment and all that. And I think that's kind of that's a strange argument to make. I think it's, I don't know.
All right. Well, let's get into some criticisms. Me and IP can start along the same lines of what you guys were just talking about on the issue of Ehrman on the group appearances, because I believe it wasn't in the Q&A where he's asked, why are you, or did Mike ask him? You'll remember, Derek. He was asked, hey, why are you what?
Said I might remember.
Yeah.
There was
I guess you're busy. You might have been really busy.
I asked him a question, on this.
But so Ehrman was asked, wait a minute, you're granting that Peter, Paul, and Mary all had some sort of experience which they interpreted as Jesus appearing to them, but you actually have more sources than on something like Paul saying that there were group appearances, and you reject the group appearances. And I want to go back and look at it once they post it, but I thought it sounded to me like Bart Ehrman was saying, well, since I don't really believe in group hallucinations, I can't explain a group appearances, whereas I can explain individual appearances through hallucinations. So I'm granting those, but not granting these because I don't have a naturalistic explanation for them. It sounded like he was just saying I'm rejecting the group appearances because I would have no real explanation for them, but I can explain these other ones, so I'll grant them. In which case, it's like, if that's your method, then why not just say, well, I'll just destroy your whole case for the resurrection. I don't grant any of it. I don't grant any of this stuff. And that way you have no case. You have no case for the resurrection. So that's that. But there are the philosophical issues. So IP, I know you'll have some comments on some of the philosophical.
Yeah, I mean, I asked him a question about this because he was talking about how, talks about what historians can and can't do, and like immediately assumes miracles are a violation of natural laws. And I forget exactly how I worded my question. I don't even know if it was read or not, but it was read that this is sort of like a philosophical view. And yet Ehrman was saying things like at one point he said in his first rebuttal, it's like we got to keep science with science, history and history, and they shouldn't bleed into each other. Or we should keep them separate. And I was like, well, wait a minute, that's a philosophical claim in and of itself. You can't, and you can't talk about Einstein's science without talking about the history behind his beliefs and what he was doing with like the cosmological constant. History bleeds into that. Can't talk about the history of quantum mechanics without understanding the science. Those two topics bleed into each other. And philosophy is being bled all over this debate. And I was just like, it was just a little frustrating sometimes to hear Ehrman say these kind of philosophical things. Like at one point, Ehrman claimed in his the first time questions were being asked to Ehrman, he claimed it's an historical fact that the laws of nature have not been broken. And I was like, well, hold on there. And I wrote it down as he said it because I was like, oh, I got to jot this down. What do you mean that? Because like how you're talking about how historians cannot investigate miracle claims. How could you investigate if the laws of nature have never been broken? Like that just seems to go a little too far. If he would have said historians can assume that it's likely they have not been broken, which I think probably what Ehrman was trying to say, he maybe just worded it wrong. But it just seemed like he was putting so much emphasis on this idea that miracles are a violation of natural laws. But what if you take like a Humean view of natural laws? Like they're just descriptions or patterns that we observe. They sort of supervene on the natural world. I mean, by that logic, you wouldn't be that much of a problem because miracles will not be violations of natural laws because they supervene on the way the natural world works, and an outside agent could insert something, and the regular patterns would take over. Like the analogy I use is like Jesus turning water into wine. Let's say he did that. Well, the natural laws take over immediately once it's wine. If you drink it, you're going to get drunk. I mean, the natural laws take in just because an outside agent has inserted something new to the system. There's still going to be natural patterns after that. They just sort of explain what is happening without outside interference. So I felt like he was focusing way too much on that philosophical view. And I don't think it really helped him that much because when you get into the nitty gritty stuff, there's a lot of problems there in my view.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to quickly add something to
Oh yeah, no, I was going to say because I wanted you guys, of course, to criticize Mike's position with anything you thought were weaknesses. But since this was such an important issue for Bart Ehrman, and it seemed like his main point, yeah, why don't we spend a little time on this? You guys give your thoughts on this as well.
I want to quickly say I agree. When I heard him argue so much about the laws of physics and how resurrections simply don't happen, or things like these don't happen, they simply don't take place, I very much agree with IP here. And correct me if I'm wrong. You seem to focus very much on that. I simply want to. Present a very dumbed down version of what Bart Ehrman was actually saying. And he was basically saying, it sounds like to me, things like these don't happen because things like these simply don't happen. Resurrections cannot happen because resurrections cannot happen because they violate, the laws of nature and the laws of physics, which is a very strange position to hold in such a debate, where you are supposed to, debate lengthily and find out whether the resurrection did or did not happen. Going into that with it violates the laws of physics, therefore it cannot happen. So I cannot accept that position to begin with. Is kind of a strange stance to have, right?
I must critique for 1 second just my thoughts on that kind of approach in a debate like this. To me, I'd be more interested in literature and in the text and things than I am in these philosophical, what are the laws of nature type of things. I would rather. No, we got to do it right, dude. I'd rather.
There we go.
No, I seriously thought it would be interesting. For example, I'll just read a quote. I think a quote's always good to do. M. David Litwell wrote this in his book, Jesus Deus. Christian theologians, ancient and modern, have declared that it is not in Judaism, Jesus, this is the resurrection, the Jesus individual, which is important, historical resurrection, because the Jews had the nation always represented a resurrection concept, Ezekiel, etc. Historical resurrection, they urge, is a complete novum in Jewish thought. a surprising and unheard of act of God. As a result, such a resurrection legitimates the uniqueness of Christian revelation and truth. From an etic perspective, however, although individual corporeal immortalization may have been novel in Judaism, it was not distinctive in Hellenistic culture. Justin Martyr famously, or infamously, if you will, declared that when we Christians say also that the Word, i.e. Christ, was crucified and died and rose again and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing new beyond what you believe concerning those who you call sons of Zeus. And this is in First Apology 21.1. Here, Justin Thoroughly Christian declares that resurrection is not a uniquely Jewish or Christian category. I think if he'd approached this, laying out when he kept talking about probabilities and stuff, if he would have approached this as saying, here's like the world they live in. They think demons are everywhere. They think literal blood has magical powers to purge people of sin. There's these ideas that today we eat chicken from Chick-fil-A like I did this morning, and I think nothing of the magical powers of the blood that was in that animal at one point. I think building that kind of thing and showing the worldview that we're building up would have been better. My criticism would have been of Mike Licona when he approached this idea of comparing Jesus with other gods. He quoted someone who said that there's only 3 to 5 agricultural cycle deities. This is the only thing. And then he said Greco-Roman literature talks about death to life characters, doesn't go into them. My one of the major criticisms, because I'm big into that comparing and just seeing, is this in the milieu? Is this in the zeitgeist? Is it in the air? Do people think of Asclepius as possibly resurrecting, or Hercules jumping upon the pyre and riding on a what is that wild mythical creature to heaven? And he has more kids too. He's a physical god in heaven after burning himself alive here on earth, and he still carries on and has more children. So I think comparing it into that zeitgeist would help better paint a picture. But I could see why maybe he doesn't put too much value in that. That's my criticism. But remember, I'm coming from my side saying, look, I used to not know anything about any of these things. I never knew Justin Martyr compared his understanding of Jesus with the sons of Zeus and stuff. They were far more like C.S. Lewis, it appears, than I think modern apologists are giving credit. I mean, they were way more flexible in ways that we aren't. And I'd love to see that happen more with Christian apologetics. So that's my thoughts. But
you remind me, I need to do a video on Justin Martyr. You reminded me of that.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add a few comments on the issue of the philosophical and natural law claims, because I thought Ehrman could have spent time on some other issues instead of putting so much into that issue. Because I mean, notice if the whole issue of whether Jesus rose from the dead comes down to a philosophical position, and if you accept this philosophical position, then he didn't rise, or you can't conclude that he rose based on evidence. And if you reject that philosophical claim, then it's fine to believe that he rose from the dead, and you can prove it. Then it's just a matter of your opinion. But he was kind of sloppy on the issue. Like Mike at one point actually broke it down, which I forget what Mike used, but he said, if I drop this, then the law of gravity says it will fall until it hits something, and I could drop it 100 times and it will keep falling. But at any point I could reach in and grab it. I haven't stopped it. I mean, I haven't violated a law of nature. I haven't violated anything. It would have fallen. I stopped it from doing what it would have done according to natural law by stopping it. And so the issue would be if I was about to drop this and then God stuck a hand in there and stopped it, then that's not a violation of natural law either. Natural law would describe what this thing is going to do if nothing stops it. I think Mike could have said the same thing about the law of entropy, because Ehrman his view of entropy, which is if you have a system, the overall amount of entropy or disorder in the system is always going to be increasing. That doesn't mean that you can't increase order anywhere. It's the overall entropy. And so, I mean, following Bart Ehrman's definition of the natural law. Every time I make a sandwich, I'm violating a law of nature because I organized something. And so it's the reason is he was applying that to something like the resurrection, whereas if a body dies, then entropy takes over and the body is going to decay and it's not going to come back to life. And it's because if something does come back to life, if something is resurrected, then it's violating a natural law, because the entropy would be decreasing because we're becoming more organized. And the reason that's weird is, we're getting to the point where, now someone can die, their heart can stop, and you can clear, zap, and someone that would have died is now coming back. And as technology gets better, people can go further and further along that line and still be brought back. You could conceivably get to a scientific point where someone could just be dead and then bring them back.
Can you imagine someone being dead for 4 days? They're decomposing, like their cells are completely decomposing. Everything's decomposing, and we reversed it. What would then happen? Would everybody be like, "Hold on, are we doing?" I'm being kind of condescending here, but imagine if we did that on a normal and it became a regular. Would we be doing better miracles than Jesus at that point?
Yeah, well, that's the claim. See, no, you can bring up points like that. So my only objection to what he's saying there, my only objection to what he's saying is it's not a violation of natural law. If you had some ability to take a dead person and reorganize the person somehow to bring him back to life, or whatever it would take, you're not violating some natural law. The law is that the overall amount of entropy is increasing. Anytime you build something out of Legos, or a tree grows, entropy is decreasing as far as in that specific spot, because the tree is growing and becoming more organized from the little thing that it was. And so anyway, it's basically the whole thing is, I think Ehrman is sloppy on some philosophical claims that he makes. And so either he should learn them really well and become much tighter when he talks about philosophy and natural law, or just ignore that stuff mostly, except for a general point about miracle claims being in a different category from normal claims. Anyway, that's all. That's
to be fair, Lycona could have hit him really hard on that, and instead he was just like, "Well, I don't think miracles are a violation of natural law." He should have gone a little bit more into like that and said well, let's talk about natural law. Let's talk about the different views of them. But they're historians. They're not philosophers here. So this is one of the things there. I feel like from a philosophical perspective, Lycona could have possibly get, okay, well, look, you're talking about my faith commitments, but you have these philosophical commitments to these ideas as well. What's the difference here? You can't prove those in a historical method. Why are you constantly bringing up, the biases of faith commitments or something? You have, well, let's just put all those aside and let's go, what's the simplest explanation here? What is going to be the least ad hoc, have the least quantity of assumptions? Let's not worry about quality of assumptions, because that's going to stem from our philosophical backgrounds, our philosophical biases. And, he didn't really go into that much because, they're historians. So it was just one of those aspects. They're trying to do a lot of philosophy here. And I agree with Derek. They should have been talking more about the historical stuff and the cultural background. I thought that'd have been much more in their wheelhouse.
I don't know if it's only me. I thought for somebody who wants to argue against the theistic position, Bart Ehrman went a lot into things like thermodynamics and entropy. I usually see appeals to that more from the theistic perspective, in order to prove that certain things may be possible, because the opposite would be absurd. I have rarely seen an atheist actually argue from such a perspective. So seeing Bart Ehrman come with that approach seems rather surprising to me, and I thought that might be because of his long background in being educated within the Christian circles and Christian apologetics. I don't know.
Let me play a hypothetical for you, David and IP. I'd love to get your thoughts. Do you think this would have been a better approach, even if at the end of the day you were still a believer in this? If let's say Bart came in and compared Jesus with other surrounding figures culturally within the zeitgeist of the time, showing the literary comparisons, how people actually believed they rose from the dead or were ascended or had an apotheosis or whatever it may be, showing this was a common idea, and then built the background behind the resurrection and its evolution in thought from Israelite religion down to the Qumran sects and whatnot into the New Testament. Wouldn't that have been a little bit of more historical development showing why a resurrection would be believed? At the end of the day, you'd still say they believed he rose from the dead, and you can still argue his point that we can't prove historically he actually did rise from the dead, but this was what was believed, and build up that case rather than, oh, entropy this and entropy that and laws of nature. And I just felt like, I don't know.
Yes and no. I think, yeah, that would have been a very interesting case to go about. Having talked to Lycona about some of these issues privately, he would have had some good responses to that stuff. You should. Are you referencing Dennis McDonald's views at all when it comes to this, Derek?
No, Dr. Litwa, Robin Faith Walsh. I think
Okay.
Dennis holds to some of these things, but he's more
I feel
zeroed in
like-
on like literature of the New Testament Gospels being lifted.
This just gives me an idea for you, Derek. I think you should try to maybe sometime this summer have Dr. Lycona and one of those guys on your channel to talk about it in that perspective. Because I know
Yeah.
Lycona him and I have talked about this a little bit privately. He does have some stuff on that, so that might be a great conversation.
That would be like a
I didn't catch that part of the debate, but Bart Ehrman has some very strong views on how the virgin birth is not something that was originally part of the story, but that it was added later on. That it was added later on as a myth to make the story stronger. Is that something that came up during this debate? I seem like I didn't really catch that, but I know that he's very much focused on thinking of the virgin birth as a mythical account.
Yeah.
That
they
is
did get into that a little. AP, remember? You probably didn't see that. That's what he was trying to compare.
I
it.
might have missed that.
But what he did do, and I felt like he could have done a little more on, but I'm always picky about that because I feel there's things that you miss retrospectively. He really did want to talk about the reliability. How much can we actually trust these gospels? And even Mike granted, okay, even if they were contradictions, the core is still there, his point. Because he was willing to grant some of these things to Ehrman. But Ehrman was trying to be like, look, you have them in Jerusalem, and then you have them in Galilee. And how many times did you see Ehrman's face go like when he would say something like he wanted to like say, no, that's wrong, Mike? I'm sure Mike felt the same way.
Oh, was he making awesome faces? Because I was just listening to it most of the time and wasn't actually looking at the screen for most of it.
2 times his face was like, what? It was the when Mike said they never left Jerusalem, and he's like, what? Like, no. But he didn't interrupt him, right? Because he was going to talk about Galilee. There's 2 different locations depending on the gospel you're looking at. The other part was when Mike said, and I guess it's not factual, Bart wanted to correct him, was when he said, well, you try to like tell all your 400 students when they're done, they're going to doubt everything they believe in Jesus, and like it's going to like deconvert them and stuff. And Bart was offended actually,
Mm-hmm.
and he said that is a misquote. That is not true.
Yeah, they both. Bart actually had a sick burn right then because he goes there goes your eyewitness testimony, right? The reliability of eyewitness testimony. That was good, but they actually both had a moment like that where Bart also sort of he said Mike just got his dissertation with some evangelical advisor or something like that, and Mike's
That's
like, no,
right.
that's totally wrong guy there, dude. So I don't know where you're getting your information.
He even apologized. Yeah.
Yeah.
One part though, there was a tension. Do you remember that real tense part where they were talking about Romans, and Bart was saying, he's like, listen, the book, it's not a special, well-written text, okay? And Mike's like, we totally disagree here. And he's like, I'm not comparing my Greek skills, Mike, okay? Like, you know how good I am in Greek. It was like a flex, like he was flexing hard. Like, you see that Greek right there, buddy? And it was just in your face. I was like, damn, that was kind of rude, actually.
That actually, I thought Ehrman was just sort of like, he didn't know what to say there at that point. It was like, almost like he wanted to go to it's like he had like a paragraph or like pages of stuff he could have said, and he knew he didn't have the time. So he's like, okay, well, I just disagree. Like, that's what I kind of got from that section.
I think there's one point that is kind of underrated about something that Bart Ehrman was trying to insist on at some point, is how eyewitness accounts are actually not reliable at all. That they are known to be very unreliable, and he was giving examples of that from the classroom, from different incidents, and I find it very funny. Taking psychology classes, I remember some research that evaluates eyewitness accounts and their reliability, and how eyewitness accounts, contrary to popular belief, are actually very, very unreliable, because people, despite fully believing that they saw a certain thing, misremember events, even very recent events. And while thinking that they give an accurate description of the events, they give a completely false description, or they are influenced by biases or by other people telling them things. They suddenly adopt other people's views or other narratives as their own views. So I kind of wish that they did talk about this quite a bit, but I kind of wish that Bart Ehrman focused more on that whole point of the reliability of eyewitness accounts.
Yeah, I have I have some mixed feelings on that particular issue, because there is, in fact, I mean, he might have, that might have been time better spent than going into a lot of the philosophical stuff, which, if you disagree with the philosophical point, then, you're not thinking his position is very strong. But I mean, the human mind can be very sloppy with certain things. Like, you can be called into court as a witness, and then you see a guy sitting at the desk, and he's the one who's being charged, and your brain will just rewire that guy into your memory, even if it's proven later that guy wasn't anywhere near it, and DNA evidence exonerates him. But at the same time, I'm thinking, all right, if I had this massively life-changing experience where I became convinced that Jesus had appeared to me risen from the dead, what are the odds that, I'm going to get that wrong 10 years from now or 20 years from now or something like that? And so,
well, I'll just say really quickly, I don't want to go too much, but I do know that Greg Boyd, book The Jesus Legend, as well as Craig Keener and Christobiography, does go into some interesting studies on memory to argue that, it's not as bad as some people say it is. There is some other research out there that I do need to get into, to also do a video on eventually, that actually does support that memory and eyewitness can be reliable. So there is that research that shows that it is problematic, and then there's other research as well.
Don't you know this? There is this thing, this specific research about 9/11 eyewitness accounts, and this is something that is recently popularly brought up when analyzing the accuracy of eyewitness accounts, which says that I don't know, half of, or 40% or 60%. I don't remember. If any of you remembers it correctly, just say it. But that about half of the eyewitness accounts of what happened on 9/11 and where they were on 9/11 are totally inaccurate, and that people have certain inaccurate memories, like, I was actually in New York and this happened, and it turns out the person was actually at that time in Texas or something like that, or living in Texas, then had never been to New York. So there's some research going around that is widely recognized, that eyewitness accounts are very much manipulated by what people want to think, what they hear, and so on.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was actually going to say. In everybody kind of touched on it here. I think Bart talks about the memory stuff a lot, but that's a really wonderful point you're bringing up there. The data that we have, the way where I've drawn my conclusions is when I'm looking at the Gospels, I'm looking at this as genre, a different kind of literature than what I'm reading with Paul's epistolary. I don't believe these are epistolary fiction. I believe these are accurate letters that are written, probably compiled even. Some of them are multiple letters, maybe meshed together, that are collected. But when I'm looking at the Gospels, I'm not looking at them as like reliable historical, this is what literally happened. And I think Mike will grant some of that, whereas Ehrman, I think, will even go further towards where I'm at. If we take that, and what you just said, David, for example, if I had Jesus actually appear to me, we're looking at the gospel accounts and getting this idea that he appeared, like they looked at him. I get this like mixed signals here. The road to Emmaus, they don't even recognize who he is. They walk and talk with him all day long. They don't even recognize him. Sounds like this is some type of literary, probably more of a message of the Eucharist, because the only time they get him is when he breaks the bread and then he disappears from them, and they realize it's kind of probably a theological story trying to say, I'm in your presence always. I don't buy this as literal. And I think when you do that, you find out, okay, how much of this literally happened? How much of this didn't? And when I look at Paul saying, hey, Jesus appeared to me, or I've had revelations from Christ, our best account to try and get Paul's is in Acts. And Acts to me is also one of those texts that I'm highly suspicious of in terms of it being literal historical content. So when we say Jesus appeared to them, we don't have better criteria other than this other literature. What did that mean? Did it mean he actually showed up and this is like they believe they saw like you and me if I really bumped into you in person? Well, you would go to John or Luke and see that. But if there was something else we just don't know, I think the data is just not good enough to know exactly what Paul's actual experience was unless you trust the historical reliability through and through on the later stuff, which we would call the Gospels and Acts.
Related to the point, can I quickly ask something? As somebody who was never a Christian and is not native to the Christian beliefs?
Poor guy.
As a disadvantaged person, I want to ask something very interesting that I find that I see when I look at the whole accounts of Jesus. The whole story, the whole account of the Roman soldiers or officials needing somebody to point at Jesus and to point out who Jesus is so that they can come and arrest him doesn't entirely make sense to me. Why do they need somebody to reveal who he is?
Actually, that's talked about in a book called Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes. And we tend to think that Jesus and his disciples are just sort of alone in the garden and he's off praying. And that probably wasn't the case. This was like Passover. The city was flooded with pilgrims. Jesus was probably praying in the garden, like shoulder to shoulder with other people around him. And so they're arguing that when the soldiers need Judas to point him out, it's because there's a giant crowd of people. Where is this guy? He's somewhere in this guarded, right over on Passover evening when people were typically going out to singing hymns and giving alms to the poor. So there's just so many people there. So, Judas got to get his chapstick on so he can give Jesus a kiss to identify him.
Okay,
that makes sense.
Yeah. And on the issue that Derek was talking about, one, definitely no time to go into this right now, but I think Luke is a pretty awesome historian in the book of Acts. But even if you totally toss all that aside, we know that Paul and the early church became convinced of Jesus' resurrection. So this is kind of what Mike is getting at there. It's Jews that was not a very common belief that some particular guy is going to rise physically. It would have been odd, and even if you have it somewhere else, but that would have been something shocking because the general Jewish belief is there's a resurrection at that comes at the end and so on. And so one guy just sort of coming back physically would have been pretty strange. And so it's like, again, if Paul sees some hallucination or he has some dream or Mary's having a dream and Peter's having a dream or they're seeing something or some shady figure, the idea is it looks like it would take something big to just jolt them into dude resurrected. This guy resurrected after being crucified and actually appeared to us so that we're now calling it resurrection. It seems like something big. And so that's kind of the point with, human memory and us not knowing what he saw. See, I can say, hey, if someone wanted to say, hey, I don't trust the book of Acts and Paul describing what he saw in the book of Acts, I think Mike would say, even if I had no clue what Paul saw, he saw something that convinced him of resurrection. And it looks like some of the others saw something that they concluded as resurrection to where that became the dominant belief. And so hallucinations don't seem to give you that. Dreams don't seem to give you that. What gives you, in other words, it seems it's like people are saying, what's it called? Is it called? I forget the term. There was a term way back in philosophy, under causation or something like that. Anyway, it's where the cause that you're proposing doesn't seem like it would produce the required effect. If Jesus actually physically rose and appeared to them, well, great. That makes sense. That's causally adequate. Saying something where any normal person back then would have said, "Oh, I see Jesus off in the distance and he's waving goodbye to me." You say, okay, God allowed him to appear to me, or a ghost appeared to me, or something like that, and that would be fine. But oh my goodness, this guy rose from the dead physically, and he's appeared and come back to me, and appeared to several of us here. It seems like it's got to be something big, and so that's one of the good things about the debate is it was getting down to how much stock do you put in that. And so someone like Mike and someone like me, I go, yeah, I think it's got to be something big, and I don't think the alternatives are big enough. But I think the resurrection is big enough to fit there. And then it seems like and I would actually put it. If I were Ehrman, I would put it a little differently, but along the same lines. If I were him, if I were to make his argument, I would start arguing basically for that a natural miracle is more persuasive than a supernatural miracle. And what I mean there is, yes, group hallucinations or something like that would be mind-bogglingly improbable, because individuals can have hallucinations. The odds of a bunch of people hallucinating and then seeing something similar, or several people in a group, even if they're separate, but and an enemy and a brother, and they're all seeing a hallucination, even if it's not groups, but people all hallucinating about the same guy. Yes, that's really, really, really improbable. It's so improbable that it's something you would never, we normally would never believe, but really, really weird things can happen. And so you could just call that a natural miracle, where it's not a supernatural miracle. It's just, it's something really, really weird happened. And it is even if it seems improbable, it's still more probable than the alternative of you bringing in God into the equation. I would probably put it something like that. But yeah, that's kind of the dividing line there.
There was so much said there, David. Dude, I don't even know where to begin. If I could say a few things. These are people who think demons rule the world. I mean, literally, there are archons that actually rule the world. They're controlling the powers that be. These are people that I would say are very superstitious. I used to be like this. I burned my Pokemon cards and smashed my Slipknot Mudvayne CDs. I thought there were demons and spirits in them. When I burnt them, there were colors coming out. Little did I know that happened probably from just the chemicals within the products I'm burning. I believed these things. I spoke in tongues. I did all of these kind of things. Paul was probably very much in line with this. They were very, very apocalyptic in their thinking. Paul was. There's a heightened sense of the end being near. There's probably traumatic stuff like 9/11 described by AP. So now they have, who knows what's happening in their brain at this point. Their master just died, if we're using the cognitive dissonance route. But the one thing I wanted to say about Acts, because I agree with you in Paul's letters, he experienced something that changed him for sure. But in Acts, the reason I kept saying literary and it's not that I don't find beauty and value. I love these texts, but I want to try and do justice to them and what they really might be doing. In his conversion, I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, this is Acts 9. I could be wrong. He's on the road. He falls to the ground. He sees a light. Even the people around hear it, but they don't see it, whatever. And then later on, it's vice versa. But in this, he says, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" That Greek phrase is exactly from 1 Samuel. It's the same exact phrase that David is saying to Saul, King Saul, which is the same name of Saul, who later be called Paul in Acts. And it looks more like mimetic. You could maybe say there's a historical kernel here, but not only does it look like this is mimesis, meaning it's borrowing scripture to kind of tell a story from the Hebrew Bible, but then there's also the flashing light that blinds him. You can find this in Euripides the Bacchae with Pentheus. And as he's going to the Maenads who are in this orgiastic ritual out in the woods, I know this is getting deep into some other stuff, but there's good reason to think there's a literary usage of Euripides the Bacchae in Acts. So when you go look at that, Pentheus is blinded by a bright light before he's condemned and killed because he did not recognize Dionysus as a son of God. Jesus is merciful, whereas Dionysus isn't. And so I start looking at these literary comparisons, and I think this seems more like theology and stories than actual history. As far as appearances and people's experiences, that's the problem. We don't know exactly what they saw and experienced unless you grant looking at the Gospels. And I'm
So
saying
Derek,
that it embellished and grew over time.
I would agree with you, Derek. There are definitely literary connections to the Old Testament throughout the Gospels and Acts. Not so sure on the Greco-Roman stuff. We might disagree on there, especially on a lot of that stuff there. But I totally agree. There are these literary devices, and like scholars like have been talking about this for a long time. Like there's a lot of times where Jesus did something, and they reference this Old Testament passage of Elijah doing something, or David doing something, or Moses doing something,
Right.
and that reminds me a lot of like when like JFK is like. JFK is just like Camelot. Or they'll talk about Barack Obama is just like Abraham Lincoln. Remember when Abraham Lincoln did this? And it's just like that's what a lot of people just do today, and they did in the ancient world. They would see people doing something, and they'd be like, "Oh, what can we compare this to in history?" Like they'll do that kind of stuff, and so like what I've seen a lot of like scholars talk about this stuff. It's like you can have those literary devices, and it can still be historical. It's you sort of like we got to witness these very cool events. How do we compare it to things that happen in history or things that had happened in stories we know about? So there you can have the literary devices in there, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that's all it is. It could totally be historical plus the literary devices there.
There is a thing, though.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I'll stop.
No, go ahead. I thought you were finished.
It'd be interesting to see if there's a good pattern in there. And when I like where like because when you go through the literary devices, it seems like they're scatterbrained. It's like they're drawing from First Kings here, and then they go to Exodus here, and then they go back to Jeremiah here, and then they want to go to Malachi here, and it's like
that phrase though. That phrase, "Why do you persecute me, Saul, Saul? Why do you persecute me?" In Greek, in the LXX, it is literally a lift of the exact Greek. Because persecute and pursue are the same exact Greek word there. And that's why I said this seems more like a lift rather than this is the literal event that happened. I'm not saying there isn't a kernel beneath it. I'm saying I don't read that and go, that's what happened. I think they're more, they're storytelling, in my opinion. They're kind of enhancing. I tell my own story of how I got from drugs to where I am now, and I mythologize my own story. I don't, it's natural for us to kind of, it was like, 3 girls, not 1. It was
like Kona talks about some of these literally devices in his book. Why are there differences in the Gospels? Like they could transplant things, they could summarize events, they could just rewrite certain things, like just to give it a little bit more poetic emphasis, and that was perfectly within the cultural context.
Here's the thing related to that point and what Derek was just saying. Of course, Bart Ehrman trusts that a lot of what you find in the epistles and in the Gospels is an accurate representation of who Jesus was. He finds it stupid to argue that Jesus never existed. He believes he did exist. He just doubts the authenticity of the accounts of the historical Jesus, how much the New Testament Jesus actually compares to the historical Jesus. And there are certain things that he says again and again that people simply add to their narrative in order to, make themselves more attached to the actual belief. And here is the thing. If people want to wholeheartedly believe in Jesus and his message, or if they wholeheartedly want to believe what Paul is telling them, who can say that people did not over time, adopt certain stories or certain narratives which they created and applied to Jesus in order to make it look like they correspond with certain prophecies found in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, or they even added certain narratives and took certain things that were never meant to be prophecies from the Old Testament and just turned them into prophecies as proofs for the divinity or resurrection of Jesus.
That was a common practice as well. The Essenes in the Qumran sects, they took scripture and it was kind of like a Bible code, and they applied things that like we probably reading it anachronistically wouldn't do. David, I wanted to tell you something. I don't know if you ever saw the video a long time ago, man. I'm small fish compared to you in terms of you're just hard to touch you, man. You know, you're on this tower and I'm like, David, I'm trying to reach you. So finally I have this opportunity. I made a video with Robert M. Price after you did a mythicist bash video a long time ago.
Oh, did I?
And I was a mythicist at the time, actually. And I did this video, and I had him wear a tinfoil hat responding to you. So if you haven't seen it, dude,
you responded to me?
It. Yes, because
that's funny.
He was like, let me respond to this guy. And we did like a 20-something minute video responding to you. It was fun.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I actually, this was, I mean, my goodness, it must have been like 2005 or something like this. This was way back in the day, but I was with Mike Lacona at some conference, and we ran into Bob Price. I don't even know if Bob Price would remember, because people didn't know who Mike Lacona was back then very much. But Mike just went up and had a little discussion with him, because Bob Price had debated William Lane Craig recently, and then we finished, and Mike said, "Well, I'll be praying for you," and then Mike cracked up laughing. But Bob Price is cool. He's like, "Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's nice." So it's he seems like a nice guy.
Yeah, I just figured I'd mention that because you were doing a video using Bart Ehrman, actually. And you were just like, I'm going to show you how silly it is by having an atheist. And you used nothing but atheist in the video the whole time, and I think it triggered me a little. I don't know. I was like,
this is funny. This is funny because I do not remember anything you're talking about right now.
It's way back
Derek
there
was
in your
hurt.
videos.
He was hurt.
I've made like 1,400 videos, and I'm getting older, so my brain's like an orange juice glass now, and like you pour stuff in, and then stuff has to spill out the side, and so.
Well, what are you, 55, 60 right now?
Just turned 46 2 days ago.
Oh, happy birthday!
Hey, you don't look a day over 45.
Happy
and a half.
belated.
Thanks.
Yeah. I know it doesn't mean much to you, but yeah.
I do like what AP said, though. I mean, we do see how many freaking Gospels and epistles and Acts of Peter and Acts of Mary, and people loved telling stories about Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I know the Orthodox position and how canon came together, and we see early remnants of them already collecting this early on in 2nd century. But the question is, how do we know there isn't some of that in the New Testament, which is what Bart's trying to suggest, that there's a development of mythology happening, or legend, if you will, about Jesus. Jesus says in Mark, "I will tear down this temple," and we think he's referring to the destruction of Jerusalem. In John, the author's like, he's talking about his body. Oh, okay. So there's kind of this like, what is going on? What is the author trying to do differently? And I'm a big nerd for the details of the text, which is why I was annoyed by constantly and entropy, and I'm like,
yeah. I think I think Mike's position, and this would be similar to me. And again, this is when we're approaching this and saying what can we figure out using a historical method here. But it would be, even if gospel writers are doing this, you still have to figure out what the facts are. And if you agree on what the basic facts are, then you're still left with a hypothesis that's going to account for these facts. So, I mean, you could say it. You could say that. You could conclude, hey, Jesus rose from the dead, but this guy was doing this, and this guy was using this literary device, and this guy was trying to make a point about this, and this guy invented this story for
L.C. Allison Jr.
for a fulfilled prophecy or something like that. But there's the resurrection does, I think, have an impact in that if the historical core gets you to resurrection, then it looks like something important supernaturally is going on. Like this is some important thing that God is doing in history. And so if God is doing this important thing in history, then it seems like he's going to make make it so that you have the information that he wants you to have somehow. And in other words, once you grant that big miracle, then other things become a bit easier to believe that you might otherwise be skeptical about, right? You might be very skeptical about some random story about Jesus walking on water. Well, if he's the guy who rose from the dead, then okay, that then becomes more plausible.
Okay,
And
here's
I
the
think
thing,
in the,
though. Here's the thing, though. If the resurrection of Jesus is the strongest thing about Christianity, if that is the main reason why you would hold on to it and believe, in his divinity and all that, wouldn't that be the specific detail that people really want you to believe, and therefore they would fortify that. I mean, if Jesus had just died without the resurrection happening, um, assuming that you don't believe he had any different value, nobody would care about Jesus afterwards. He is important because of the resurrection. People want to believe because of the resurrection. The resurrection is considered this big proof for Jesus. So naturally, it's expected that they build such a story into it in order to make his entire divinity and the whole religion valid.
Now, are you talking about embellishing a story or just making up a story because that'll help people?
I'm
get
not
people
sure.
interested?
Both. I'm not sure where I am exactly on that.
That was actually my position before I was a Christian. I thought, hey, our guy died. We want to keep the movement going, so why don't we make up a good story? Because lots of people down through history have made up stories, so let's make up a good story and keep the movement going. And it was the issue of which back then I thought was a bunch of them, but at least some of them now. It seems like a lot of them were at least willing to endure persecution, and we have good reason to think that at least a few of them died. But I mean, are they really making up this religion and then going out and dying for it? And I tried to think of other people down through history who, died for something they made up, and it seems to be a pretty small
Joseph
category. So
Smith
Here's the
might.
thing, David. Here's the thing. You know about Muhammad, and you know about the moon splitting, right? The one that nobody saw because they were sleeping at night. So
I remember that.
Oh,
They were
oh.
sleeping, so no one saw it. Exactly.
Oh, but by the way, and I'd like to get IP back in here because he hasn't jumped in a while. But no, by the way, I applied the same reasoning to other positions, which is why I don't think Muhammad was just making up a lot of his claim that he was a prophet. I think he really believed that he was a prophet, and he's not just trying to swindle people. Mainly because once I see you're willing to lay down your life for this, it starts becoming same thing with Joseph Smith. As nutty as I think he was, I start thinking, I don't know, you might be crazy enough to believe some of this stuff.
That's what I think.
Yeah, I think Joseph Smith believed exactly. I thought he really thought he was special, and he discovered this stuff. And same with Muhammad. With regards to the background, like what David was talking about, this idea they would embellish the story about their dead Messiah and then bring it on. I know scholars like N.T. Wright, Greg Boyd, Craig Evans have talked about this. It just with the cultural background of the Jews, we can look at other Messiah figures like Simon Bar Giora, for example, who was the alleged Messiah during the 70 AD period. And we know that he was killed by Rome. And it's so hard to picture his followers sitting around the next day after he's been taken back to Rome, and either he was thrown off a rock or he was I forget how he possibly could. They could have cut his head off or something. But sitting around the next day going, "Oh, I've just had this vision, and I've seen Simon. I felt his love around me. He's been raised from the dead, guys. I know it." What the argument is that it's so hard for that to come out of the culture about this idea of the disciples are going to carry on the religion by saying that he's been raised from the dead. It's not something the Jews specifically were looking for. And if you saw the hallucinations, I know Mike talked about this when Bart brought it up, but you would think, oh yeah, he's been exalted to heaven, or he's been vindicated by God, and his spirit has been set upon the throne. You wouldn't think that he physically had come back. That's just something that's so weird that they got from this, if it was hallucinations. And we can compare it to, of course, what would Simon Bar Giora's followers have done after he was executed? Well, they moved on, and they eventually got themselves a new Messiah a couple generations later, Simon Bar Kokhba. It wasn't, and the Christians could have done that too. They had a good candidate, James, the brother of Jesus. If you're going to carry on the Messianic movement, you get yourself a new Messiah in that culture.
this is why I have more questions than answers on this. This is why
Yeah,
I
me
think
too.
the data is difficult for me to get down to the bottom. I mean, we don't see Simon Bar Kokhba have like this Eucharist developed, and I have to admit, this is foreign to what you would imagine what Orthodox Judaism would even eating and ingesting the claiming you're eating my flesh, drinking my blood, no matter how you want to interpret this and allow Protestant interpretation or what, Eastern and Roman Catholics want to interpret. My point is, this is something that you do find in Greco-Roman movements, if you will. We call them mystery cults, things like that. I'm not necessarily making the equation, Mike, and saying that
Yeah,
this
don't
is
get
How
me started
dare
on
you.
mystery
How
cult.
dare
I will
you.
Too
go-
late. You've already
Listen-
done it.
No, but listen, there's going to be a presentation on Tuesday on my show. You're going to want to check out Derek Bennett. Really, he's very good at articulating this. But why are these foreign things that we wouldn't expect Jews to think popping up in this movement unless there is more than one thing happening? So crucify me now. I had to get that word out now. Okay, go ahead.
No,
Okay,
no, think it's a good
I
point.
want to get back to. Do you want to respond to that?
No,
Mikey?
let's move. I don't want to turn this into too much of a back and forth. I want
Oh, yeah, we should.
Get back
We,
to that thing very quickly.
Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
Because I want to corner you a little bit because I love it so much.
you see, we're
So,
here to discuss a debate, and what does AP do? Ruins the friendship. He becomes like, okay, go ahead,
see?
Ali Dawa. Go ahead, Ali
You
Dawa.
see, I will humiliate you and destroy you. You will not
destroy
come
you.
back from this. Your career will be over. Since I brought up the whole moon splitting thing, right? So this is related. It is not just something that I'm saying because it's related to a point that Bart Ehrman was making. Because different cultures or different religions also make similar arguments, or different religious groups do not come to Christian conclusions. Muslims and Hindus don't come to Christian conclusions, and so on. Now you apply a certain logic of people seeing the resurrection and other people following that and risking their lives for that message, but expanding on Bart's point without holding him responsible for my question here. You know of the whole moon splitting story, and you know that this is something that is said about Muhammad, right? That he was there and the moon splitting happened. And as far as we trust the authenticity of these reports, of these hadiths, you see that it is widely reported that this did indeed take place. So why would we assume that that people simply made this up, that they simply came up with this in order to, give Muhammad credibility, and that they afterwards went out with that and died for that message?
Oh yeah. Well, that I mean, on a superficial level, that's a good point, but it actually helps my point. I mean, you look at the Quran over and over and over again. It just denies that Muhammad could perform miracles. The passage that says, "And the moon is cleft asunder," that looks like it's talking about something at the a sign of the end times or something like that. You don't get any story about this having anything to do with Muhammad till more than a century afterwards, when, I mean, repeatedly in the Quran, after they want to say that Muhammad supposedly split the moon, over and over and over again, even after that in the Quran, when Muhammad is asked, hey, why aren't you performing any miracles? There's always some excuse, and it's never, oh, what are you talking about? I split the moon, you idiot, right? It's never that. Whereas the belief in Jesus' resurrection, that does go back to the earliest level. I mean, that's what supposedly sets these guys off on their beliefs about Jesus and causes them to rethink the scriptures and so on in light of this man who rose from the dead. And so, yeah, if we only had the story of Jesus rising from the dead from sources that came more than a century later, I mean, I don't know any Christian who takes second century sources terribly seriously. Notice, I mean, we even started once we find out that certain martyrdom stories are actually second century, we start going, oh, can't fully trust those. I mean, it's possible that guy was getting it from earlier people and so on, and maybe we put some stock in that, but you're not going to rest a lot on something that came more than a century later. Whereas in Islam, I mean, all of their miracle stories are coming from more than a century later. So it's like, you can say, hey, I'm doubting the resurrection account for these reasons and so on, but to draw a parallel with Islam, they're kind of in a different ballpark there. Here in Christianity, you're saying, how did that first generation come to this conclusion about this guy? What can account for that? Whereas in Islam, how did 4 generations later come to this conclusion about Muhammad? Well, it's easy to figure out how you got to a story over 4 generations. It's a little trickier to think about how that first generation. You want to say something, IP?
I had a question about the moon splitting thing. Was that's said after Islam is already conquering everything? Like they already have a lot of land, or like I don't know much about the history.
Yeah, the thing is, the Quran only says the moon split and the hour has drawn near, or something like that, or the moon has cleft asunder, the hour has drawn near, but it's not clear what exactly is meant there. And then you have reports from at least a century or more later, which attributed to different people, which is why Muslims consider these reports authentic, because they say by our standards they cannot be considered inauthentic. We have multiple people saying that the moon was indeed split in Muhammad's time when people asked him for a miracle. But again, it just goes back to accounts of people saying, I heard this person say that this person said that this person said that Muhammad split the moon in two, and everyone witnessed it.
But this does, by the way, draw an important distinction here when we're talking about, if we're talking about Islam and so on. Because if you take the standard Muslim arguments like, the Quran's been perfectly preserved, and you could have a debate about a philosophical claim whether a book being perfectly preserved for 14 centuries would or would not be evidence for Islam or for the Quran. And I happen to think, obviously if you had a book sitting somewhere for 14 centuries, then I wouldn't think that's terribly impressive. If somehow every time a person sat down to write a copy of this book, they were miraculously preserved from error, I would actually think that's actually some kind of evidence. But all of a sudden you look into the issue and it's just total nonsense. There's actually nothing there. There's tons of textual variants and missing passages and so on. And it's like that with the other arguments they use, like the scientific miracles of the Quran. Well, I mean, you got the sun setting in a muddy pool, and stars are missiles that Allah uses to shoot demons.
That's true. It happened.
And it's. But I mean, I'm thinking about because the issue, one of the issues that was big issue between Mike and Bart was, what do you think about other people's arguments if they were arguing for something miraculous? When with Islam in particular, all the main arguments that you use, you don't get down to some philosophical issue of how much confidence you should have in this or that. It's just what you're saying is there is not actually there. And when you actually look at what the evidence is, it's actually the opposite of what you're arguing. And so your argument falls apart where, in a case like this, I don't think we've progressed anywhere beyond what we saw in the debate earlier. Namely, you either still think something really big happened to account for their confidence in the resurrection, or you're explaining it somewhere else. And a lot of that's, I don't think we talked about this much, but in terms of what Mike started off with the biases, and then Ehrman talked a bit about it. It seems like it's almost like we've got this sort of web of beliefs right now, and does a resurrection fit nicely into this other set of beliefs I have? Does it cohere with the other things? And if you've got God and you grant the possibility of miracles and things like that, well, that can fit in there. And if you don't have anything like that in there, then it's just no. That's too weird. That's too weird.
In all honesty, the whole discussion about the moon splitting was just a pro gamer move on my part. I just wanted to, at the same time,
you wanted me to start talking about Islam. That's what you wanted.
Yes. I wanted you to debunk Islam while I also criticized Christianity. But here's the thing. Now, Bart Ehrman, of course, as a historian, focuses very much on this topic of the resurrection. In all honesty, to me, when I look at why I believe or don't believe in Christianity, the resurrection, whether it did happen or not, is something that is unverifiable, which is why we're not getting anywhere, and which is why they will not get anywhere. And it's kind of an unimportant question. What matters more to me is the logic behind the resurrection and the theology and the Christology and all that.
I need to show you guys something real quick here. If I
Oh,
can.
go ahead. I just want to say we should be. I don't want this to be like some 3-hour thing. So we'll start winding it down here. But yeah, go ahead.
I think it's important that everybody witnesses this because, this isn't a 4th century or 4 centuries later. Everybody's going to be an eyewitness of this. Can you share the screen? Can everybody see it? I don't know if there's a way to actually share that.
Remember right before we started, and I said this is totally new. Totally new setup.
I know. I'm testing your skills here.
Hang on. Go ahead and
don't share something inappropriate.
Wait. Guest screen do you have a purple screen?
Yes.
I do. A purple wave.
It's like a wave. Yep.
All right. I'm going to click on it. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There we go.
Check this out. Everybody's going to know the truth after this.
Amazing.
Boom, baby! Yeah.
All right, and now I have the problem of getting us all back in here.
Thank you, Dylan. Great job.
Hang on. I forget how to get everyone in here. Do I? Whoops. No, that's the wrong button.
Oh, hello.
Hang on. I forget which button I'm supposed to push. And...
I think
in a minute.
No, I got it. I figured it out.
In a minute, David's gonna be like, back in my day, we used Skype in the '90s, and it was amazing.
So now you know it. It's true.
Yeah,
it was.
In case anyone was wondering, I mean,
darn, now we're all totally out of order.
Yeah. I can relax on David's chest instead of AP's chest.
Can we? No, I got to switch hands now to high five. This is. Anyway, yeah, no, there's so much here. I do think AP's right. We'll never get to the bottom of this. I think that they believe they experienced something. I'm highly suspicious on what that might be, especially living in a place where almost every street corner in Rome has an Asclepius temple there, with things on the walls, kind of like you go into a store and I rate this store great. They have great products and yada, yada, yada. Well, there were people giving testimonies of how Asclepius gave them, there's one guy walks into the temple with no eyeballs in his eye sockets. And he walks out with eyeballs. He was born without eyeballs. He walks out with eyeballs. This is on the plaque on the wall, and you're like, you definitely want to go to Asclepius. He can take care of you. This is right there in the time that Paul's around and stuff. So people believe in all sorts of stuff. And I don't know. I don't know what actually happened. I think they experienced something. Christians today experience things, which it makes me want to ask that question. When did, if we just grant the historicity of Cornelius, this guy never met Jesus. All he's doing is listening to people who are telling him about this. He had to have experienced something himself, like I think I experienced when I was a born-again Christian and other Christians experienced, that made him believe that what he's believing is true and verified through that experience that he's having. Do you guys think experience plays a bigger role into why people believe, even though they've never touched, seen, or whatever with Jesus?
I think I agree very much with who was that? A certain YouTuber made a list of best arguments and worst arguments for the existence of God. That was Genetically Modified Skeptic, I think, and he was basically saying that personal experience, is the strongest, but also the weakest.
Well, he's Go ahead, Abby.
Okay.
I want to.
I've always had a hard time with me personally with basing it off my own experiences. I've never had this sort of revelation where I felt the love of Jesus and therefore I'm a Christian now. It was a slow process for me.
You're not born again.
I'm not just that kind of person. I'm just you have to list it out in a nice, something like a dissertation that I can read and I can go through it and weigh it against other worldviews. And I think what Derek is talking about, I think, when it comes to what Lycona is doing in the debate is saying you can explain one of the resurrection facts or one of the facts the resurrection is built upon in this way or that way or this way or that way. But when you get everything together, you get the cumulative case together, now we got a problem, because then it's how do we explain all of this at once with a simpler explanation? And that is what Lycona is trying to get at there. It's this is why this is an anomaly in the historical record that historians still wrestle with today. It's because it's just when you get the cumulative case there, it's like, okay, now what do we do? There is a case here when you get all the facts together, and how do we explain all this in a simple way?
Yeah, I wanted to address that experience is that simultaneously the strongest and the weakest, because normally if someone says, why do you believe in God, or why do you believe in Jesus or something like that, you give classic arguments for the existence of God or argument for the resurrection, when experience is definitely playing a role, right? I mean people here generally know I was a violent felon and a mental patient, and I'm sitting there waiting to be shipped off to my third mental hospital. And then I conclude, wait a minute, maybe this guy did rise from the dead. I wasn't completely convinced, but it was enough to make me think maybe I'm wrong here. And then it was just kind of, okay, what if I pray and nothing happens? What if I pray and nothing happens? Well, then, it's not like I'm getting any worse. I'm already as messed up as I can possibly be. So I pray and I tell God that, hey, I'll believe in you right now. If you can do anything with me, you're welcome to it. But then, instantly, like mentally, things change. I just went from sitting around thinking about torturing people all day to not thinking about that sort of thing at all. And there's definitely, and I'm saying this because I'm not a feelings kind of guy. I don't have most normal feelings. I can feel anger and rage and things like that, but not most things. And then all of a sudden it's like this wonder at the world, and like I'm seeing the world for the first time and so on. I know if someone asked me how I became a Christian or something like that, I would tell that as part of the story. But if I were to say to someone else, and this is why it's true or something like that, then you raise the, what about other people who've had different experiences or people who've had no experiences and so on. So it doesn't seem like my experience could play some huge role in someone else's assessment, especially when you're a mental patient. Who knows what the heck's going on in your mind? We don't. Great. Some switch turned on and suddenly you started not behaving in some weird way. That doesn't tell me a lot about whether Jesus rose from the dead or something like that. When it's just a fact. To me, if I'm assessing whether God exists or something like that, or whether Jesus rose from the dead, that's still always in my mind. That like, hey, whatever else happens here, I know I prayed back then, and I know a lot of things changed right then, and I know that I didn't think that I was gonna. I thought I was done. I thought my life was like so screwed up. I'm just done. And then all of a sudden it's just not, and things just start getting better. And so it does play a role. So yeah, I think it is, like, personally, that could be like it can be like the biggest factor for you, but somehow like the, much weaker if you're trying to share that with anyone else.
Mm-hmm. I find it very nice that David basically agreed with me in length with something that I said very briefly.
It doesn't happen that I agree with you much.
That's why I'm here, man. That's
Yeah, I had the opposite experience. I had great experiences as a Christian, but at the end, getting off drugs permanently to the point where I'm almost 7 years off all substances. The only thing I do is coffee. I had no hope in me. I was kind of that, like, I'm going to use again. I'm going to have to stay on drugs. I just didn't think there was a way out. I was on heroin, injecting heroin. I was at the bottom, and it was realizing that it wasn't, I was a horrible sinner and a worthless creature, that realizing, hey, I have a medical condition. I have an actual disease, and I'm not a bad person. I've done things that aren't good. This is like a turnaround for me in my own philosophy in my head that helped me. And I always thought about this with you. I've heard you make the statement that if Christianity is not true, I'm just going to go murder people. Do you honestly believe that?
Well, it's not. It's not. If Christianity is not true, I'm going to go murder people. It's one, you could reject Christianity and still believe in God and a source of moral law of objective right and wrong or something like that. And so even if I decided tomorrow that Christianity is not true, if I still believed in God, then I would still believe in that there is a right and wrong, and these things aren't simply an illusion. With that said, it doesn't mean that even if I concluded that it's all a bunch of nonsense and there is no God and there is no real right or wrong and things do come down to culture and what we're raised to believe, which that was my position back in the day, it's kind of, I would kind of be more along the lines of, well, I'm going to end up doing what I feel like doing and whatever I want to do. And it's more along the lines of, I know how I used to think. And back then I didn't care a lot what anyone thought. I wasn't pressed to say, okay, I'm just going to live 80 years of my life and then get to a point where, oh, it hurts. It hurts when I pee. And it's like, why would I want to go out like that? And so it would be more along the lines of, like, right now, I wouldn't get violent with someone except like to defend my family or something like that. Whereas if I did not believe in, certain things that I'm supposed to do as a Christian, and it was just myself, I'd probably be much quicker to react violently in certain situations. So it's not, hey, if I find out Christianity, sure, I'm going to go on a killing spree or something like that. It's more along the lines of, I know what I was before, and so if I go back to anything like that, I know what I was like back then, and it's if back then if I thought I could get away with being violent, I would be violent, and I wouldn't care.
So what you're saying is
that's the basic position.
What you're saying is I'm a Christian and now I'm boring, and that's good.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad this helps you, and obviously I've seen your testimony, so I know you had it hard, and this is what's working good for you.
Oh,
so
by the way, hats off for getting off drugs, and I'm saying that as someone. I mean, my mom died of an overdose. My brother's brain damage from an overdose. My other brother's in prison right now for being hooked on meth and dealing and stuff like that. And so drugs is like every other problem in the world. I look at it and think, man, I can handle that. I mean, like this. Islam is about to take over the world. Like, I could take this. I could take this on, right? But like drugs, it's like the one thing in the world. I'm like, I have no idea what to do about this, man. I have no idea what to do when people are hooked. It's like there's just no reasoning with anything, and so hard stuff.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any final thoughts? Any final thoughts before we head out? IP. Final thoughts on anything?
I'm going to try to get Derek's haircut the next time I appear on his channel, so we look exactly the same.
Hey,
I think that'd
I'm
be
growing
great.
this out, dude. You notice that now. I'm starting to do a little thing, trying to compete, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Mine was getting too long. My wife made me trim it up. She said, you're starting to look Amish.
Hey, I could actually see you as like going with an Amish look, man. It would suit you. It would suit your personality.
Absolutely.
No. I like air conditioning too much.
So, IP, final thought: Did Jesus rise from the dead or not?
Yes.
Ha!
I
In your
think
faces.
Probably.
Oh, man, it hurts.
I think it probably happened.
You wasted your time, Derek. All right, final thoughts, Derek.
I tried. I mean, I freaking tried. Okay.
Unlike Bart Ehrman, you tried to destroy.
I tried. No, like, again, I don't think we have good enough evidence to know exactly what happened and how that happened, but we have sufficient reasons, in my view, to think superstitious mindsets are really prevalent during these times. And there's also other narratives, Apollonius and Diana, other weird things going on. So I would just say keep looking. Keep looking.
I will give my final thoughts on this. Is I when it comes to the resurrection, I do believe it happened. I don't agree necessarily just starting from there. Like when you get into the debate, you have so many background assumptions from someone like Licona and Ehrman that you got to build up to there. Like you got like one believes that God exists, one does not. One believes the New Testament is reliable, one does not. I feel like you have to have those debates beforehand before you can even get to the resurrection. Like I don't even want to debate the resurrection with an atheist who doesn't believe Jesus was buried in a tomb, because I feel like that's such an important aspect of this. You have to have that debate first. So like I would rather debate if Jesus was buried in a tomb with someone before we can even get to the resurrection. So I just want to say the debate is not going to solve it. The debate is not going to be the end all be all, despite what people are saying on Twitter. This is just opening people up to a lot of more possible views, possible evidence for both sides.
And by the way, IP, that is part of the reason that Mike and Bart had the debate that they did was they agreed on a lot of the same facts. Whereas you're pointing out, hey, if we don't agree on the facts, then we gotta debate the facts first before we try to figure out the total correct view of the facts. You want to say something, Derek?
No, I just was going to say, like, I like to be flexible. I hope people be more flexible. Bring that kind of philosophy when you're looking into this stuff. Hold to your beliefs. I don't want anyone to change that. I want us to be able to have these conversations. I think the one walk away is you see two Christians, you see two people who label themselves atheist on this channel. We had a friendly, awesome dialogue. This was a blast. I can imagine having this with other people of other faiths. Just not Ali Dawa.
Yeah, guys, I have to say to all the Muslims watching, I know that there are plenty of individual Muslims out there that we can have totally friendly discussions with and so on, but the people who seem to rise to in popularity in the Dawa scene couldn't have a discussion like this. It wouldn't happen. They would be looking for an opportunity to humiliate you. I must humiliate him, right? And so that's why it was good that Mike and Bart had a nice friendly discussion and so on. They tossed some jabs at each other, here and there and stuff, but they're clearly very friendly. And then we're all friendly here. AP.
What?
Final thoughts, man. Where you been?
I don't know what anyone is talking about here. I'm just curious, who destroyed who? Get to the point. Who humiliated who? That's what I want to know. So start from the beginning. What do you think? Who humiliated who?
Everyone humiliated you, atheist.
No, I think the conclusion is very clear. Christianity is true.
True.
Oh gosh,
I'm just posting that. AP's assessment of the debate.
Yeah. No, I don't know. It's the whole debate that happened today is something that is rather, I guess, intellectually stimulating to see. It's an interesting debate to have. Again, as said, I don't really get much in terms of changing my beliefs on a certain thing with this specific topic on whether the resurrection happened or not, because I just fail to see that the point can actually be made and that the resurrection can actually be proven or disproven. It's just a very tough debate to have. You can't really come to a conclusion, in my opinion. Of course, you might disagree. So therefore, not much has changed, although I feel like the experience was very nice. I think it was very good that such a debate took place for, I don't know, 7 hours, people sitting there together and having such a long debate. It's incredible. You usually see 1 hour debates or 2 hour debates, and so little is being said and so much needs to be said. In today's discussion, they sat there and for hours and hours had this long debate, and it still feels like both sides said a lot of things, but it still feels like there is so much more that needs to be said on this topic. Mm-hmm. What concerns my beliefs and my assessment of the situation, I am of course right in the end.
Of course.
That's all I want to say. That's all I want to say about this.
Well, you guys doing that? He's trying to.
We should connect. We should all connect.
Hey,
everybody.
Yeah, we could have a. Wait. Oh, darn it!
You ruined it.
This is not easy. Ding, ding, ding. With our powers combined, we are
Wonder Twins. Came together like Voltron, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so anyway, my final thoughts on everything. Someone's asking me about my broken nose. Is there a growth on my? No, it's just broken. I used to deliberately annoy people until they would punch me in my face, and for some reason they always hit me square in my nose because I was sticking my head out making fun of them. Anyway, so yes, my nose got broken a ton when I was in grade school. So hope that enlightens you. But as far as the discussion and bringing certain issues to the forefront and showing where we disagree and so on. All that's very interesting, especially when you figure out where you disagree on, and then you see where a point that someone else is making, but you have different beliefs, and so you interpret that differently. So I'll just give you an example, like in Derek, when you were bringing up Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I've noticed just from reading that when Saul was chasing David, that it sounded the same. It never occurred to me to try and think how do I reconcile that until you just brought up and you're saying, it looks like the author of Luke is doing something here. When I'm thinking, well, if Jesus actually said that, why would Jesus say something that's parallel until, it just starts processing in the brain? But then and then I'm thinking, wait a minute, Jesus on the cross, and he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is not him just crying out. He's actually quoting a psalm there. He's quoting a psalm there. And in the psalm, he's saying, actually, I'm like David, and you guys are like the guys who are attacking David, but David is ultimately vindicated. So it's like he's telling a story. But then if that's how Jesus is, then if he's talking to Saul, it could be like, hey, in that story, I'm like David and you're like Saul, like who you're named at. You're like Saul going around trying to persecute and attack him. So anyway, it's just made me think of this issue, which I was talking about earlier, is if you believe in the resurrection, then you start thinking, okay, this is an important guy, then it looks like, this information would be reliable. Because God's going to want to preserve that and so on. And so you would be interpreting it like that. Whereas if you didn't believe in the resurrection, it would just look like, what in the world's going on here? These would look like problems, right? These would look like problems.
Can I vindicate and just say this? I love the story. So for me, it's beauty and intelligence in the author. For me, it's these people writing these are not, to me, they're not fishermen. These are brilliant people who wrote these, especially Luke Acts. I mean, they are highly sophisticated, and I value the narrative. I love the stories. I don't follow a ontological conclusion that you do, but I can appreciate the richness and the depth of everything. Getting in Acts 17, Paul's another Socrates. I mean, he's like, it's just amazing stuff to me. I love reading this stuff, learning this stuff, but I just don't believe at the end of the day. I just love the stories.
Here's the thing: when Derek brought up that parallel, of why you're persecuting me, my immediate thought was, okay, that could be a problem, or it could be that this is deliberate. It is supposed to be that there is supposed to be a parallel that is. That was planned. I don't know, divinely inspired and planned, and so on.
Yeah, that's why you admitted that Christianity is true.
That's why I came to the conclusion that Christianity is true.
Thank you, Derek. You convinced AP.
I immediately took that into perspective, and I thought, well, it doesn't have to be a problem. It could be actually something good. And now you come up, now you present your perspective on it, which is very interesting. As a conclusion, Derek educated you, and you in return educated all of us. And
now I had the evidence to convert AP to Christianity. And
fantastic.
Thanks everyone
Just call
for
an atheist if you want to convert somebody to Christianity.
You know what I want to say. I want to add something very quickly, just because I said a few times that I don't really care about the resurrection debate, and that's what it sounded like. But I feel like for me personally, it would be more interesting to have a discussion on the logic of Jesus, coming and dying and being resurrected for redemption and all that. I feel like that is something that personally is much more interesting to me. Whether the resurrection happened or not is kind of a secondary issue.
Yeah, maybe we should. Go ahead.
I'd love that debate. I mean, I got like N.T. Wright's like whole series on like Christian origins where he goes into a lot of that kind of stuff. And I've read like all four of them, even the 1,400-page book he's got on Paul. And so, there's a lot of interesting stuff on that.
Notice Mike Jones immediately, okay, I'd love to have a debate on that, right? When we're like, hey, look at this friendly conversation we're all having. Why couldn't it be just a friendly conversation like we're having?
Okay, I will have a friendly conversation on that.
All right, everyone, thanks for joining us. Hats off to Mike and Bart for doing a 7-hour marathon debate. That was awesome. And AP, any final words for anyone who's trying to decide what their belief might be, and they've got atheism, they've got Christianity, they may be thinking about other worldviews?
Oh, of course. Stay away from Islam.
And I think we can all agree on that one.